Sidebar is the official podcast of the Napa County District Attorney's Office. Hello, everyone. This is Carlos Villatoro, the Public Affairs and Media Officer for the Napa County District Attorney's Office, and this is the Sidebar Podcast. And I'm so glad that you guys can join us today in the District Attorney's Law Library. Today, I have a special guest. His name is Paul Gero. He is the Assistant District Attorney for Napa County. Paul, how are you doing?
Great. Glad to be here.
Excellent. I'm so glad that you were able to join us. And, this podcast is a little bit different from the ones that we have been doing in that this is a true crime podcast. And we can thank Daniel, one of our subscribers to our YouTube channel, for this podcast. So, Daniel, I think Daniel gets a shout out for this podcast. Speaking of subscribing, make sure that you guys subscribe to this channel so that we can grow and we can continue doing these podcasts for your enjoyment. So today we are talking about an infamous murder that has occurred, that occurred in the 70s in Napa. Most Napans know about this murder because it is so very brutal and is so very notorious. And there was a landmark here in Napa that basically froze the crime in its place. And of course, I'm talking about the Fagiani cocktail murder. This was a murder that occurred on July the 10th of 1974. And for decades, it went unsolved. Isn't that right?
That's true.
It went unsolved. And well, let's talk a little bit about the case. But first, I want to ask Paul here, since he is new to the podcast. Paul, tell us a little bit about your what you do here for the Napa County District Attorney's Office.
Sure, Carlos. I've been a DA for 25 years and been in the Napa DA's office for 23 years. I've been a deputy, a chief deputy, and now an assistant. My current role is to run operations for the office, and so that just makes sure that the office works correctly. Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, Paul is the prosecutor that would prosecute the person who is responsible for this murder. Now, Paul, what can you tell us about the night that this murder occurred?
Well, from what we know, Anita Andrews was tending bar. She worked with her sister, Muriel Fagiani, and they both took turns keeping the bar going. She was the last one to close up. Mm-hmm. And from what we know, a gentleman came in and was smoking a cigarette and having a final drink. And 3 men came in. Right as she was closing, she gave them each a quick beer, and then they left, and she was alone with the gentleman. And then the next morning, her sister, Muriel, found her in the back room, raped and murdered. Mm-hmm. And that's when the police investigation started.
Now, at the time, of course, as we're talking about 1974, there was no such thing as DNA evidence back then. But what happened as a consequence of this murder throughout the investigation, the owner of the bar, Muriel, she closed it. She closed the bar and left the bar as it was the night of the murder. And through the decades, people would walk by this building on Main Street. And if you don't know about Napa, Main Street is basically the main thoroughfare in the downtown area. So it gets a lot of foot traffic. I remember growing up in this town and being curious, walking over to the bar and peering inside with a flashlight to try to see what was left behind on the night of that murder. So it was basically a tourist attraction, if you will, as macabre as that sounds. But it speaks to to the thinking of Muriel. Of course, I can't speculate, but I want to say that she was probably very distraught about this murder that happened. And, she didn't know that DNA evidence would become a thing, but she closed it. Why did she close it for all those years, do you think?
Well, I talked to Muriel about this, and she said that she thought that there would be evidence in the bar. There would be technological advances. She didn't obviously know what DNA was, but she decided to put a lock on the front door of the bar the day that her sister was found, and she said she's not going to open it until they solve the murder case. She did not know that would last several decades. Obviously, with that prime real estate, she gave up millions of dollars, but she really loved her sister, and that was way more important to her. And so the bar was literally left locked and untouched until the crime was solved.
So this was a cold case then. Let's fast forward then to 2007, when police began investigating this once again. And as I understand, this is a case that quite a few investigators took on and investigated. Is that your understanding too?
Yes, so there was many suspects over the years, and several times the investigating agency, the Napa Police Department, thought that they may have caught the killer, and it did not turn out to be so. And I talked to some of those detectives when I was investigating this case, and so each time they were surprised. They thought they had it, but they didn't.
They didn't.
And the person who was ultimately responsible was not on anyone's radar.
And that's why we're here. This is why this is so fascinating. Paul and I were talking about this earlier, and we both agree that this is truly an interesting case for us to talk about. So how was it solved?
So one of the most recent detectives, Don Weininger, was assigned to look back into the case. And with the advent of DNA technology, he decided to send several items of evidence to the Department of Justice to be tested for DNA. One of the items that he chose was a cigarette butt that was left on the bar. It was a very clean bar found that morning. There was, it looked like it had just been wiped. And there was no dirty dishes or glasses or ashtrays except for one. One ashtray, one cigarette butt, and then each bar stool was turned in except for one that was slightly turned out, and that was the one in front of the ashtray.
So that was a crucial piece of evidence that was sent over for analysis. Now, it's my understanding that the detective sent over that cigarette butt for analysis in 2007. However, they did not receive word that there was a match to the DNA of the person responsible until 2009, and that had to do with the age of the case as well as the numerous pieces of evidence that they were processing. And so in 2009 there's a hit, and there's a gentleman identified. His name is Roy Melanson.
Correct.
Now, at the time, he was serving prison time in Colorado for a murder that had occurred 50 days or so after the murder of Anita.
Correct.
Correct. So tell us what it was like delivering the news to this woman who for decades was essentially mourning her sister from that murder.
So the initial feeling when law enforcement was, we're excited and ecstatic that this person had been caught. He was up for parole in Colorado, so it was important that we follow through with this case, and we had every intention to do so. And so we were equally excited to let Muriel know what had happened. You had talked about her before. she not only locked the bar, but she went to many supervisor and council meetings and was always bringing up the case and asking what was done. She also went to the police department many, many, many times over the years, demanding that they look back into the case. So she was heavily invested. And so we were extremely excited to tell her when we told her that we had caught the person who murdered her sister. She seemed relieved more than excited. Yeah. She said, "Thank you so much for finding him." And she insinuated that it was over. And I said, Muriel, we still need to prove the case in court.
Yeah.
And we need to convict him. And actually, I'm going to need your help doing that. I'm going to need you to testify. And she said, I'm just happy that you found him. So I'm really not that interested in the trial. And I said, but I'm going to need you, Muriel.
Yeah.
And she said, yeah, maybe, I don't know. And so she just looked so relieved.
Yes, and unfortunately, Muriel, this woman who had been grieving for decades and, going to the city council meetings and going to the police and, locked her establishment up for decades, lost out on millions of dollars. Sadly, she passed away before the trial could happen.
Correct. It almost felt like she was able to let go. And that she, this sort of lifelong pursuit had ended, and she rapidly declined after we gave her that news, and unfortunately she passed away.
So tell us a little bit about how did the trial go with this individual? I know you had talked about something that chilled me to the bone, which was Paul took the jury to see the bar. What was that like?
So that was a rare moment in a jury trial. You actually get to go to the crime scene and show the jury. Also, it was a murder case, so it was chilling. They had already seen photos of the crime scene, and the actual murder was horrific. And so to take the jury into a crime scene that's 37 years old and is sort of like going back in a time machine.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was chilling because nothing really had changed from the photographs that we had from 1974. And I think it had a profound effect on everyone who walked in there.
Yeah, no, I had asked you this earlier, but what was the smell like in there after all those years of it?
It was musty.
It was musty.
It was musty.
Yeah.
Not a lot of air conditioning in there.
Yeah, and this is where she was stabbed to death with a screwdriver. Yeah. And she was sexually assaulted, it's believed?
Yes, I think we can confidently say that.
Yeah, okay. Such a sad case. So you take them into this bar, this ancient bar, for this murder, and just so that you guys understand, murder isn't common in Napa. It hardly ever happens, and we aim to keep it that way. But
yes,
it's not a common crime, and so this is why this case was such a big deal, because it remained unsolved for decades. And so you take them into the bar. What was their reaction like, would you say?
There was hushed voices. There was a certain respect for this poor woman who was brutally murdered there. And I think there was some acknowledgement that this was real. It's one thing to be in a courtroom and look at old pictures that are in black and white.
Right.
Obviously in a murder case, unlike other cases, you can't hear from the victim directly. And so I think it had a profound effect on everyone who was in the bar that day.
What were some of the challenges that you faced as a prosecutor with this case?
So based on the age of the case, there were certain parameters just getting the evidence in that were difficult. I'll give you a couple of examples. One was the person who retrieved the evidence, including that cigarette butt, was deceased. He was a criminalist, and so we had to figure out alternate ways to get that evidence in. Same with the pathologist who did the autopsy. And so we really had to be creative in trying to figure out legal ways to introduce those key pieces of evidence. Those three men I mentioned who went to the bar, when I went to find them, two of them were deceased, and one of them was dying of cancer. And he was in a home up north, and we actually drove to talk to him. And he said, I am dying of cancer, but I will be there to testify for you, and it's something good that I can do before I leave this earth.
Wow.
And amazingly, he did make it to the trial, and he testified, and then he actually passed away shortly thereafter, but he was very happy to make that contribution.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. So after hearing all the testimony, visiting the crime scene, so the burden of proof is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
Correct.
Is that right? So what was the verdict?
First-degree murder, guilty.
Guilty. Yeah. And the sentence was life in prison? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. You had mentioned that there were other murders that were solved because of the submission that Napa did for the DNA. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was talking about the Eric Koppel case.
Right. And that, of course, is another major case in Napa. And that's something that we'll probably do another podcast on, because it is such another fascinating case. But so as far as we know, this gentleman, Roy, he was responsible for, of course, this murder here in Napa, and along with a hiker who was killed in Colorado. Is that
correct? So when I looked into the case, and myself and detective and investigator, we traveled sort of across the southern part of the country and sort of tried to retrace his steps before he got to Napa. And afterwards, he pretty much went straight to Colorado. And it was clear that he was a serial rapist. He had raped many women. He had been to prison several times. And each time after they were raped that we know of, the women would call the police and he would be punished. And so it became evident that he changed his modus operandi and decided that he was going to kill his victims after he raped them. And unfortunately, it happened once in Louisiana that we know about. It happened in Napa, and it happened in Colorado, and we think that he was responsible for a couple other times, but those are unable to be proved at this point.
So the guy was essentially a serial killer.
He was a serial killer.
Jeez.
And he just happened to come through Napa, that time, and unfortunately saw Anita and went into the bar.
Now, as far as Mr. Melanson goes, he is now deceased. Is that correct? He died in prison?
Correct, yes.
And still this case is talked about in the various Napa locations. Everywhere you go, people know about this case. Here in the office, we have several employees who are new. Maybe they're new to Napa, but now listening to this podcast, they can get a sense of it. Another fascinating thing that I kind of wanted to talk to you about is that you've been a prosecutor in Napa for a long time, and you've seen how DNA evidence has transformed the way that we're able to prove our cases, because it's such an extraordinary amount of information that's left at the crime scene. How important has the development of DNA evidence been to this office and to DA offices around the country?
Well, our goal is to find out who committed a crime, DNA can be very helpful. It's certainly the biggest change that I've seen in my career. Now I would say that it's more about computers and cell phone evidence.
Right.
But DNA had a profound effect, and you can, prove rape cases, child molest cases, burglary cases, robbery. DNA can be used in so many different things. It took, over 2 years to test the DNA when this case was solved. And now they can do that a lot faster, and that helps as well. But it's not the end-all, be-all. Like in this case, it gave us a direction to go into that we had never thought about. But we still had to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah.
So I think it is a great tool, particularly when you have no suspect.
Are you happy with the outcome of the case?
Yes. I think certainly the fact that he was never paroled from Colorado was really important. We certainly didn't want him released and to do this to anyone else. And the information that we brought to Muriel, and as well as Anita's daughter and the rest of her family, was quite satisfying.
Yes, and Anita was working 2 jobs, to my understanding. One as the main bartender over at Fagiani's cocktail lounge, and she also had a job at Napa State Hospital.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
She was a hardworking gal who didn't deserve to be murdered in such a brutal manner, and I think not a lot of people know that. So thank you very much for joining us today on the Sidebar Podcast. Is there anything I didn't ask you that you feel would be important for our listeners to know?
No, it's been a pleasure, Carlos, and I hope that we can keep talking about true crime.
Excellent. And thank you guys for joining us on the Sidebar Podcast. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel, drop a comment, and leave a like, and we will catch you next time on the Sidebar Podcast.